Hello, my name is Michael Maloney, and today I'm going to be presenting my literacy intervention plan. Okay, firstly, so my student X, he was a year 8 student from Canberra High. Student X was chosen under the premise that he was accessible. He was a family friend and he came over often. Having someone that I knew, we were able to get straight into the core component of the task opposed to getting through this ice-breaking sort of thing that I've experienced in other assignments of similar style to this. Um, so I was first thinking about the assessment piece. I saw opportunities to gain learning that would genuinely assist my future teaching career. Many assignments at university, I don't actually see the meaning. I find them disconnected, and I'm not actually learning anything that's going to provide me with some purpose. So I thought that was great. It was a great motivation tool. Student X was an active and outgoing student. He thrived in PE, but he claims to hate reading. So in my opinion, he was really the perfect student for this task. So I saw some shared schooling experiences here. I also didn't really like reading and loved PE, and these shared experiences assisted in the creation of our connectedness and helped us create an appropriate reading strategies. Okay, so cycle one. Prior to the first lesson, I got student X to bring in his work. Um, Sorry, we'll just go back there. So prior to the first session, I requested student X to bring in his reading material that he was given to by his teachers at school. I wanted him to take everything along. He arrived with a bundle of reading materials. We had sifted through the materials together. He had a maths book, he had a SOS book, and he had an array of these PE handouts with anatomy sort of background, anatomy content, sorry. But when we were flicking through, he gave off that general unenthused reaction to all the reading materials. So yeah, on my observation phase, I used the cycle that was presented in one of the lectures at the beginning of the semester that you can see right now. Um, so I gave student the choice between the text that he brought in, to which he would prefer. With little actual thought, he picked the SOS book, and we were reading a chapter that he had begun in class. It was about the Japanese Shogun era. From the first word I read, I knew that student X didn't understand the meaning of reading. He was extremely disengaged and he was voicing his frustration through questions of, why are we doing this? I don't see the point. I hate reading, rah, 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 etc., etc. But this was good. This gave me this motivation to really flip his thinking of reading around. So I completed a SWOT analysis of his first reading task. Find SWOT analysis. They're awesome and they work for everything. So I'm just going to fly through a few of the key areas of this SWOT analysis. So strengths. He did have a fair few. So he had little problems pronouncing words. He could state them well, but I knew he didn't know the meaning of them just because I know I shouldn't have in this observation phase, but I stopped there and I said, do you know what that means? No idea. So he displayed no fear for reading, which was also great. Some weaknesses: he had poor recollection of what he just read. He struggled to read with flow, consistently had to reread sections to grasp meaning, and opportunities that were evident. He displays interest in many aspects of life, and I thought this was a tool that I could gauge him in reading. So he was a really outgoing, confident student. He was willing to give everything a go, everything a crack. Some threats: so he could develop a strong dislike for reading, which could affect his engagement in school and furthermore disengagement from society and so forth. Um, he had an admitted fear for reading in front of audiences, but this wasn't so much of a problem because it was just between us two. So yeah, that is the SWOT analysis there. So now moving on, I think I've taken a slightly different approach to what I've seen in the presentations when we gave the speeches in class, but that's okay. So my 5 strategies that I introduced into that second section. So firstly, I had visualize the information. So I assume that student X was a kinesthetic learner and a visual learner, just purely off our relationship. I knew him, he'd come over often, he really was a hands-on type of student. And this information helped me guide my intervention approach. Over the course of my practicums that I've had, I've quickly learnt that it is very beneficial to know your own learning style, or your teaching style, as well as your students. This helps the creation of lesson plans that resonate with the students' learning styles and ultimately improves engagement. So I'm also a visual learner, and this was worth my own efforts to research what exactly what exact visual approaches are out there that could assist in someone reading. I read an article about visual learning which gave examples of how visual experiences can assist the retention of information. The paper began by stating that we remember people's faces, we've struggled to remember people's names. I think we are all victims of this, and we've all experienced this. And I thought to myself, why? Well, names lack that visual, abstract component that faces do. And the article went on to state the importance of creating visual meaning when reading, as it can assist its development of creating an abstract memory to the words. So that's quite self-explanatory. I don't want to delve too deeply into that. But I use this approach by requesting student X to pause for a minute after a paragraph and attempt to visualize what he just read. We also tried this with our eyes closed, and this seemed a lot more successful. Now, I'm not sure why just yet, but once we had completed this a few times, I asked if he was okay to share with me what he visualized. I also shared with him what he had read. I found this process of sharing, it allowed for many advantages. I find from my own experiences, when I explain information to people, it helps me best ingrain the knowledge. So, yeah, we would then share what we had just read in that chapter. So visually, we would sort of talk about what our pictures were in our head, and I just gave him emphasis to think about, to try to visualize the words. And I know it's something not so easy to provide instructions to, but that's as deeply as I could see it. So it also, this sharing process, it gave us a different perspective of the situations, which sometimes eventuated to questioning and discussions and ultimately a deeper learning occurrence. Okay, secondly, we had reading aloud. I came across the term internalizing when we're reading about advantages of reading aloud. Internalizing allows the reader to create their own meaning and their own nature to the word, and it assists in this unconscious assimilation. So a speech therapist, Joan, 2010, I read an article about her work, and she stated that reading aloud will help the material to sink in and become ingrained, making it easy to draw information you've just ingested for when you need to reference it in the future. So I thought this was really relatable. So I believe that we are all born with like a clean slate, and this is our brain essentially, and our experiences draw or craft this slate into the people we are today. So that really resonated with me, the word ingrained. I thought that was awesome. So we, on our first attempts of reading aloud, he seemed a little bit awkward and still slightly broken in his speech. I suggested that he tried reading aloud and pretending that I wasn't actually there. This seemed to work very successful, but it wasn't as good as the visual one that I mentioned above. But when I wasn't there, when I pretended I wasn't there, he read awesome. He was confident, he was loud, and very strong in his words. Okay, I've just done a time check, so I know I've got to shoot along. But taking notes, I found many articles stating the benefits of taking notes. Even if you take notes and you never look at them again, it improves memory as it's a form of repetition. This is a strategy that I've recently also incorporated into my studies. I won't go into the example just due to the time, but yeah, when he rewrote what he had read, he was able to hold that information. Now, I think we can all relate to that in our own lives. If we just simply look at something, read over it, without making our own notes to it, it's so hard to hold on to that information. Yeah, and now rewrite in your head. This is my fourth stage that Tavani suggested in one of her fix-up strategies, and this was to formulate your thinking by relaying the information just read. So going over what you just read in like a word format. So it's a shift away from that visual component, but more of a focus on retelling yourself what you've just read. So we did this, he would read aloud, and after the paragraph, I would tell him in other words what he just read. I would just pretty much relay that in my own words, and he would do the exact same thing. This was very successful. I was surprised it worked so well because I thought it was quite an abstract thing. It's so closely associated with that visual, the visual learning one that I mentioned above. So it was great that he was able to rewrite in his head away from that visual terminology used in the first fix-up strategy. And finally, and also my conclusion, is to use a highlighter. I printed off the reading for student X, and he was able to highlight his work, and this it helped him skim back, was the main advantage of this, skim back when we did the retelling and all the other previous examples provided, is able to look back and go, dot, 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 okay, yep, I've read that, instead of having to reread. Yes, and so in conclusion, I don't think that meaning arrives because we have highlighted text or use sticky notes. These are stepping stones to assist our reader grasp meaning through purposely engaging in text while we read. Though this intervention plan has been able to provide my student X with strategies on becoming a more engaged and thoughtful reader. Thank you for listening. It was an absolute pleasure sharing my intervention plan. Thank you.